We've been picking, for 25 years. I mean, a lot of the stuff that we gravitate towards, we've bought that stuff, 10, 20 years ago, so we know what it is.
For more than a decade, America watched two lifelong friends wander through forgotten barns, abandoned garages, and dusty back roads searching for hidden treasure. On camera, Wolfe and Frank Fritz looked inseparable, like two ordinary guys who had somehow turned childhood dreams into television history. But as the show exploded into one of the biggest hits on cable television, Frank was suddenly let go, and everything between them collapsed in a way nobody fully understood at the time. Not long after, Frank returned with a devastating interview accusing Mike of abandoning him during the darkest period of his life. The public was convinced that their friendship would never recover. But shortly before Frank's death, something happened between the two men that nobody expected. Years later, Mike finally revealed the chilling details of their final moments together. And what they said to each other will shock you. The friendship that started it all. Wolfe and Frank Fritz met when they were just kids. They went to the same junior high school in Bettendorf, Iowa, a small city along the Mississippi River. Neither of them came from money. Both were raised by hardworking single mothers who did their best to keep food on the table and clothes on their backs. Growing up without fathers in their households was not easy, but it gave the two boys something in common. They understood each other's struggles in a way that other kids could not. Out of financial necessity, they started exploring together. As children, they scouted neighborhood alleys, open garages, and junkyards looking for things that other people had thrown away. A broken bicycle here, an old sign there, a rusted tool that still had some life left in it. They were not thinking about television shows or fame. They were just trying to make a few dollars and stay out of trouble. But those early adventures planted a seed that would grow into something much bigger. Before they became famous pickers, both men worked regular jobs to pay the bills. Frank spent several years working as a local fire inspector, a steady job with good benefits. Mike worked in a bike warehouse and in bike sales, doing the kind of work that did not require a college degree, but required showing up on time and working hard. They stayed in touch through those years, but picking was still just a hobby, something they did on weekends when they had spare time. That changed when Mike started thinking bigger. He believed that there was a television show in the world of picking, something that had never been done before. He spent nearly 5 years pitching the concept to various networks. Nobody wanted it. The executives did not understand why anyone would watch two guys dig through other people's trash. Mike kept pitching anyway. He believed in the idea, and he believed in Frank. Eventually, the History Channel decided to take a chance on them. American Pickers premiered on January 18, 2010. The response was immediate and overwhelming. More than 3 million viewers tuned in for the first episode, and the ratings kept climbing from there. At its peak, the show was drawing over 5 million viewers per episode, numbers that made it one of the highest-rated cable reality series in television history. A show about two guys looking through old barns had become a cultural phenomenon. The secret to the show's success was not the antiques, it was the friendship. Mike focused on vintage motorcycles and large-scale industrial rust, the kind of big, heavy pieces that required a truck and trailer to haul away. Frank became the beloved expert on what the crew called mantiques, oil cans, vintage toys, old signs, and small collectibles that fit in the back of a van. Their styles were different, but their passion was the same. They loved the hunt, and viewers loved watching them hunt together. With their shop manager Danielle Colby, the trio did something that no one had expected. They revitalized small-town tourism across America. When Mike and Frank featured a town on the show, people started visiting that town. They wanted to see the shops and the barns and the antique stores that had been on television. The Pickers proved that discarded historical items possessed tremendous economic and storytelling value. A rusty gas pump was not just junk, it was a piece of history, and someone would pay good money to own it. For years, the show rolled along smoothly. Mike and Frank seemed happy. The ratings stayed strong, and the fans stayed loyal. But behind the scenes, things were not as perfect as they appeared on screen. The friendship that had started in junior high school began to crack under the pressure of fame, money, and the simple fact that two people can grow apart even when they have known each other their whole lives. The chaos that followed would tear them apart in a way that no one saw coming. The chaos behind the show. The reality television machine is brutal, and American Pickers was no exception. The production schedules became grueling very quickly. Mike and Frank were required to travel up to 70,000 miles a year, all of it packed into a white cargo van with no privacy and no escape from each other. They were isolated from their families for months at a time, sleeping in cheap motels and eating fast food because there was no time for anything else. What looked like an adventure on television was actually a grind that wore both men down. Frank had a secret that the cameras never showed. He suffered from severe Crohn's disease for more than 3 decades. Crohn's is an inflammatory bowel condition that causes constant pain, digestive problems, and extreme fatigue. Managing the disease requires strict diets and careful attention to what a person eats. That kind of discipline is hard enough at home, but it is nearly impossible while filming on remote back roads, where the only food options are gas station sandwiches and drive-through burgers. Frank did his best, but his body was fighting him every day. The physical strain of the job caught up with him in a serious way. Frank required a highly invasive spinal surgery to correct structural back issues that had been worsened by years of lifting heavy objects and riding in a bouncing cargo van. The operation was massive. Surgeons placed 2 metal rods inside Frank's spine, and the incision required 185 stitches to close. This was not a minor procedure. It was a major surgery that took months to recover from. Frank was bedridden and completely off the filming roster for a long time. While he was lying in that hospital bed, Frank faced a reality that he had been trying to ignore. The pain from his back and his long-term illnesses had become unbearable. To manage it, he had developed a severe dependency on alcohol and prescription medication. He initially began taking them because he needed to function, but the line between medical need and addiction is a thin one, and Frank had crossed it without even realizing. Recognizing that his life was spiraling out of control, Frank made a brave decision. He quietly entered a substance abuse rehabilitation facility in Iowa called the Abbey Center. He did not announce it to the press or post about it on social media. He just checked himself in and started the hard work of getting clean. He completed a 77-day treatment program, nearly 3 months of intensive therapy and medical supervision. When he walked out, he was sober and determined to stay that way. But the damage to his body and his career had already been done. While Frank was fighting these battles, Mike was dealing with his own private hardships. In 2021, Mike went through a highly publicized divorce from his wife, Jody Faith. The split was messy, and the tabloids had a field day with it. At the same time, Mike was managing his expanding antique archaeology business empire, which included multiple store locations, merchandise lines, and production responsibilities for the show. He did not have time to slow down, but he also did not have the partner he had relied on for years. Frank was out sick, he was in rehab, and was definitely not present. The stress of all of this, the grueling travel, the health crises, the addiction, the divorce, and the business pressures put a strain on Mike's and Frank's friendship that neither of them knew how to fix. They had been friends since junior high school. They had built a television empire together, but they were also two middle-aged men with very different problems and very different ways of dealing with those problems. Mike coped by working harder. Frank coped by retreating. The gap between them grew wider with each passing season. Fans who watched the show had no idea about any of this. They saw Mike and Frank laughing as they dug through barns. They saw the easy banter and the genuine excitement of finding a rare piece. They did not see Frank's pain or Mike's exhaustion. They did not see the arguments that happened after the cameras stopped rolling. They did not see two old friends who were slowly losing each other. But while the chaos behind the show was real and was destructive, the worst was yet to come. The real reason Frank left American Pickers was not just his health problems, or his addiction, or his recovery. Those were all factors, but they were not the full story. The truth about why Frank Fritz was pushed out of the show that he helped create is more complicated and more painful than anyone understood at the time. The real reason Frank left the show. In July of 2021, Frank broke his public silence by giving an interview to The Sun, a British newspaper that had no reason to protect anyone involved. The interview was explosive. Frank revealed that he had not spoken to Mike in over 2 years. The two men who had traveled 70,000 miles a year together, who had built a television empire together, had gone more than 24 months without a single phone call or text message. Frank accused Mike of never checking on him after his grueling back surgery, never calling to see how he was doing, and never reaching out during his recovery. The man Frank had considered a brother had apparently vanished from his life. That was not the only grievance Frank aired. He also spoke openly about the show's editing structure, claiming that the network intentionally skewed production to make Mike the main star while minimizing Frank's contributions. He used a specific number that caught everyone's attention. He said the editing was tilted 1,000% in Mike's favor. This was not a casual exaggeration. Frank believed that the show he had helped create had pushed him to the side, and he was angry about it. Despite Frank's public declarations that he wanted to return to the show once he was healed, the History Channel and Cineflix Productions made a decision that shocked fans. In July of 2021, the same month as Frank's interview, the network officially announced that Frank had been permanently removed from the franchise. The reason they gave was vague. They said he did not fit the big picture of the brand moving forward. Frank was out, and there was nothing he could do about it. The production tension exploded online when the network announced Frank's replacement. The man taking his place in the white cargo van was Mike's brother, Rob Wolfe. Fans were furious. They had watched Mike and Frank for over a decade. They had invested in their friendship. Now Frank was being replaced by someone's brother, and the whole thing felt like a corporate decision rather than a creative one. The fan base split into factions, some defending Mike and the network, others rallying behind Frank. Danielle Colby, the shop manager who had been with the show since the beginning, broke her production silence with a public statement. She backed Mike completely. She wrote that Frank had been causing immense instability and pain for himself for years. Her words were careful, but pointed. She implied that Frank's addiction issues had made filming impossible, that the crew could not rely on him, and that the show had to move on without him. It was a harsh assessment from someone who had worked alongside both men for more than a decade. Mike himself eventually spoke about the falling out. His reflections were sadder than fans might have expected. He confessed that losing Frank's day-to-day presence was like losing a brother. He said that the cruel things Frank had said to the press came from a place of intense internal pain, not from who Frank really was at his core. Mike admitted that Frank simply could never get it back together, that the health problems and the addiction and the isolation had broken something in his old friend, and that no amount of phone calls or visits could have fixed it. The truth about why Frank left the show is not simple. It was not just Mike being selfish or Frank being difficult. It was two men who had grown up together, built something amazing together, and then grown apart in ways that neither of them understood how to fix. The show demanded more than either of them could give. Frank's body failed him, and his addiction took over. Mike had to keep the show running, and keeping the show running meant making decisions that hurt his oldest friend. Frank was fired because he could not do the job anymore. He was in too much pain, he was drinking too much, and he was battling addiction. The network could not insure him. The crew could not rely on him. The viewers, if they had known what was happening behind the scenes, might have understood. But they did not know. They just saw their favorite show change, and they blamed the people who made the change. The interview Frank gave to The Sun was his way of fighting back. He wanted the world to know that he had been wronged, that he had been pushed out, and that the brother he had trusted had abandoned him. But Mike's version of events was different. He said he had tried to reach out, but Frank would not take his calls. He added that the addiction had changed Frank into someone he did not recognize. The years that followed were not kind to Frank. The show moved on without him. The fans eventually stopped arguing about what had happened, and Frank, alone with his pain and his memories, entered the final chapter of his life, a chapter that would end in tragedy. The tragic death of Frank Fritz. On July 14, 2022, a friend discovered Frank unresponsive on the floor of his home in Davenport, Iowa. He had suffered a devastating stroke, a cerebral infarction that cut off blood flow to part of his brain. The damage was catastrophic. When Frank woke up in the hospital, he was not the same person who had driven across America in a white cargo van. The stroke had paralyzed the entire right side of his body, forcing him into a wheelchair that he would never leave. He could no longer speak clearly, and the words that did come out were often jumbled or hard to understand. He could not dress himself, feed himself, or take care of his most basic daily needs. The man who had spent decades hunting for treasures in dusty barns could no longer walk to his own mailbox. By August of 2022, the Iowa courts had to step in. Frank was declared legally incapacitated, meaning he could no longer make decisions for himself. The court appointed his longtime friend, Chris Davis, as his personal medical guardian, the person who would make choices about Frank's doctors, treatments, and living arrangements. A bank was appointed as his financial conservator to protect whatever money he had left from being taken advantage of while he was vulnerable. Frank, who had once been a star on one of the most popular shows on television, now had other people managing his life because he was not capable of doing it himself. Over the next 2 years, Frank's health did not get better. He was rushed to emergency rooms multiple times due to severe medical complications, including sudden seizures that came without warning and bouts of pneumonia that filled his weakened lungs with fluid. Each hospitalization was harder than the last, and each recovery took longer. The stroke had damaged not just his body, but his ability to fight back against new illnesses. His system was failing, and the people who loved him could only watch. On September 30th, 2024, Frank Fritz passed away while in hospice care. He was 60 years old. The official death certificate listed the cause as late effects of his stroke, combined with 2 other serious conditions: aortic valve stenosis, which is a narrowing of the heart valve that makes it hard for blood to flow properly, and COPD, a lung disease that makes breathing difficult. His body had been fighting on too many fronts for too long, and eventually it just gave out. Before he died, Frank made his wishes clear. He did not want a standard public viewing where strangers would walk past his casket. He did not want a formal funeral service with flowers and eulogies. He requested cremation, and he asked that his close friends organize something less traditional in his memory. They honored his wishes by putting together a tribute golf outing and by dedicating a building in Savannah, Illinois, which they named the Frank Fritz Man Cave. It was not the kind of memorial that most celebrities receive, but it was the kind that Frank wanted, and that was what mattered. But Frank's death did not bring peace to everyone who knew him. In October of 2024, just weeks after he passed away, a major legal battle erupted. Frank had signed a will in 2023, and that will was submitted to probate court for approval. The document left the majority of Frank's estate to close friends and caregivers rather than to his blood family. That did not sit well with everyone. In 2025, Frank's biological father, Bill Fritz, filed a lawsuit contesting the will. His claim was serious. He alleged that the document was fake, that Frank had not actually signed it, and that even if Frank had signed it, he completely lacked the mental capacity to understand what he was doing because he was under a court-appointed guardian at the time. The lawsuit seeks to throw out the will entirely and replace it with whatever the state decides. The people who cared for Frank in his final years are now fighting his blood relatives over who gets what he left behind. The battle is ugly, and it is not over yet. But there was one more shock waiting in the aftermath of Frank's death. Mike Wolfe, who had been accused of abandoning his old friend, later revealed a detail about Frank's final moments that no one had expected. The truth about how Frank died and what Mike did when he found out changed the way fans saw the entire story. The secret reunion before Frank died. For years, fans believed that Mike and Frank's friendship ended on an extremely bad note. The internet was full of stories about their feud, the years of silence, the bitter interviews, and the permanent split. It made for good drama, and people accepted it as the truth. But the real story turned out to be very different. Mike later revealed that the ice was broken over Memorial Day weekend in 2023, more than a year before Frank passed away. At Frank's specific request, Mike flew out to Iowa for a private, completely untelevised reunion. There were no cameras, no producers, and no crew. Just two old friends who had spent most of their lives together and needed to see each other one more time. A close family friend who witnessed the reunion later reported that both Mike and Frank immediately burst into tears upon seeing each other. The years of silence melted away in seconds. Mike sat by Frank's side, something he had done 1,000 times in that white cargo van, and he told Frank something that he needed to hear. He told Frank that nobody could ever replace him. Those words meant everything to a man who had spent his final years feeling pushed aside and forgotten. Frank could not speak clearly anymore because of the stroke, but he did not need to, because his tears said enough. That reunion was a turning point. The feud that had consumed the final years of their partnership did not disappear completely, but it no longer mattered the way it once had. Mike and Frank had found their way back to each other, and that was enough. On September 30th, 2024, Mike received an urgent phone call warning him that Frank's body was shutting down. He did not hesitate. He dropped everything, cleared his schedule, and traveled directly to Frank's bedside at the Quad City Area Hospice Facility, where Frank had been moved for end-of-life care. He arrived not knowing whether he would make it in time. He did make it. Mike was physically present inside the hospice room, holding Frank's hand and gently rubbing his chest at the exact moment Frank took his very last breath. The man who had been accused of abandoning his friend was the one who stayed until the end. He did not let Frank die alone. As Frank was passing, Mike whispered directly into his ear. He told Frank that he loved him, something that men of their generation do not always say out loud. He comforted Frank by saying that he harbored absolutely no anger over the past feud, that whatever had happened between them was in the past, where it belonged. And then he told Frank to go find his mom, who had passed away years earlier. It was a simple thing to say, but it carried the weight of a lifetime. Frank's mother had been one of the most important people in his life, and Mike wanted Frank to know that he would not be alone on the other side. Following Frank's passing, Mike went on the record to publicly cement Frank's legacy. He did not try to take credit for the show's success or minimize Frank's role in making it happen. Instead, he stated unequivocally that the global phenomenon of American pickers would never have existed without the heart and soul of Frank Fritz. That was not a polite thing to say at a funeral. It was the truth, and Mike wanted everyone to hear it. Mike Wolfe and Frank Fritz were two men who grew up together, built something amazing together, and then lost each other to the pressures of fame, illness, and addiction. They said cruel things to the press. They went years without speaking. They hurt each other in ways that cannot be undone. But they also found their way back to each other before it was too late. Mike was holding Frank's hand when he died. Frank asked to see Mike before he lost the ability to ask for anything. That was the ending of a friendship that survived everything life threw at it. The fans who watched American Pickers for more than a decade saw two guys who loved hunting for treasure. What they did not see was the full picture of two human beings struggling with health, addiction, divorce, and the simple difficulty of getting older. Mike and Frank were not characters on a screen. They were real people with real problems, and those problems sometimes got the better of them. But in the end, love won. Not the romantic kind of love that fills movie screens, but the quieter, harder kind of love that survives years of silence and still shows up at the hospital bed. Frank Fritz is gone now. He was cremated per his wishes, and there was no formal funeral. But his spirit is still there in every dusty barn and every forgotten attic that pickers explore. Mike Wolfe continues to drive the back roads, looking for treasure, but he drives alone now. He carries with him the memory of a boy from Iowa who loved old oil cans and vintage toys, who fought his body every day just to show up for work, and who, in the end, made peace with the brother he had lost and found again. Frank Fritz was irreplaceable, just like Mike said. And now, finally, the world knows the truth about how their story really ended. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to click on the next video on your screen, like this video, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.